Mr. Paul Fletcher, thank you very much for sparing your time with Amar Ujala, and we hope that you are having a very fruitful deliberations here in India. So we have few questions for you so that our readers can get a fair idea about what actually is going on in the digital industry. My first question is about your tenure as a communication minister in Australia. Since you were very pivotal, you had a very pivotal role in creating and in enabling an act. So can you please take us through that journey? Was it very difficult or was it very easy? Yeah.
During my time as Communications Minister in Australia, I worked with our then Prime Minister Scott Morrison and our Treasurer Josh Frydenberg to develop what we called the News Media Bargaining Code. We started work on that as far ago as late 2017 when we asked our competition regulator to prepare what became known as the Digital Platforms Inquiry. And in 2020 we announced that there would be a mandatory code governing the commercial negotiations between Google and Facebook on the one hand and Australian news media businesses on the other. We released a draft of that so that stakeholders, including Google and Facebook, would have the opportunity to comment on it. The draft legislation went into our Parliament in December 2020 and it passed our Parliament in February 2021. But there was a bit of turbulence along the way. Google at one point threatened to withdraw Google search services in Australia. In response to that, our Prime Minister and I met with the Global Chief Executive of Microsoft, who indicated that they would be interested in expanding Bing in Australia. And we didn't hear much more of the threat from Google after that. Facebook shut down the Facebook pages of Australian news media businesses on the 18th of February 2021. Unfortunately, they also shut down the Facebook pages of vital community services like police, ambulance, a rape crisis centre, and so that proved to be not a very good public relations move for them. In the face of all of that, we held firm, and there was strong political leadership, particularly from our then Prime Minister Scott Morrison and our then Treasurer Josh Frydenberg. The legislation passed the Parliament, and I'm very pleased to say that both Google and Facebook have since then negotiated commercial deals with news media businesses, nearly 20 from Google and around 13 from Meta, the parent of Facebook.
Mr. Paul, Australia's digital market is a little different from India, and you have seen very closely, you have seen the Indian market. So, do you relate between both the two markets, and do you think that the same bargaining code can apply here, or do you advise some changes in it?
I want to be very clear that media policy in India is, of course, a matter for the Indian government, and I'm not here at all to say what should be done. All I'm here to do is, first of all, to share the experience that we had in Australia during my time as Communications Minister. And I'm secondly here to learn about the extraordinary success of the Indian information technology industry. And of course, companies like TCS, Infosys, Wipro and many others are globally known and have a big presence in Australia. And of course, what's been achieved in India in using information technology to deliver services to citizens, including, in many cases, citizens who only 5 or 10 years ago may not have even had a mobile phone service, may not have had a bank account. What's been achieved here is extraordinary. The success of Prime Minister Modi's government, the success of the IT sector, of the mobile phone operators, the cellular operators, this is remarkable. And so I'm certainly here to learn about some of those things, just as I'm here also to share, at the request of the Publishers Association, to share the experience that we had in Australia in developing our news media bargaining code.
What challenge do you see for the digital news industry nowadays? Do you think that the biggest concern is the monopolistic environment which is created over the years by the big tech companies? Do you think that?
We certainly regarded this as a competition policy issue. The fact that Google and Facebook have achieved extraordinary success in digital advertising, and in doing that they're competing with news media businesses for a share of the advertising pie, but the content they are using to attract eyeballs to their sites, and that they're then very successfully monetising with digital advertising, includes content that is generated and paid for by news media businesses. So in the Australian context, if a 2-minute news clip from 9 News, the television news service, appears in a Facebook feed, a Facebook page, that helps attract eyeballs to Facebook. If a Google search leads a user of Google to an article on the website of the Herald Sun newspaper in Melbourne or the Australian Financial Review newspaper, that is content generated and paid for by an Australian news media business that is helping to attract eyeballs to the Google page, the Google site, which they in turn are very successfully monetising through digital advertising. These issues are by no means unique to Australia, they are global. They are certainly issues faced by media businesses in India, as they are in France and in Britain and in Canada and in Thailand and in countries around the world, including indeed the United States. And so we came up with a particular approach to these issues in Australia. Every country needs to make its own laws on these matters. A very important principle is that these are decisions for sovereign governments to make. But a corollary of that is that they're decisions to be made by sovereign governments, not by tech businesses in the US or anywhere else. We were very clear at all points that we welcomed the strong involvement of US tech businesses in Australia, Google, Facebook and many others over the years, just as we welcome the big Indian tech businesses in Australia, where they have a very big presence. But there are decisions that should only be made by sovereign governments. In our view, the competition policy treatment of the relationship between the digital platforms like Google and Facebook and news media businesses was a matter to be properly dealt with by the sovereign government of Australia. And it's not just a competition policy issue, but it has related consequences in terms of media policy, because you want to have a diverse and vibrant media sector. And also, in a liberal democracy, it is important that you have a diverse media. So it went to the very foundations of liberal democracy.
So, sir, you have shared the example of Australia. So, sir, precisely speaking, like what solution do you see for the in coming years to restore the equality between the tech companies and the news publishers?
In India, you mean? I'm not here to say what should be done in India. I'm simply here to say that we dealt with, in Australia, a particular problem, which is a problem that applies in countries around the world, and particularly in vigorous liberal democracies like India, where a diverse, vigorous media is very important, as it is in every country. But certainly India is known for a diverse and vigorous media, and for being, obviously, the world's biggest democracy. India is a country of enormous importance globally and around the world. Nations look very closely at what India is doing. So I'll be very clear. I'm not here to say this is what India should do on this matter. I'm simply here to give a speech in which I talk about what we did in Australia, but I'm also here to learn from the extraordinary things that India is doing in building a global scale IT sector and in driving reform of the digital economy in India in a way that is extraordinarily inclusive. It's very impressive, and it's something that countries around the world can learn from.
Sir, do you think that the initiatives like DNPA will play a crucial role in breaking the ice?
I think DNPA is important because it is able to make the case, to define what the issue is, and to advocate for public policy solutions. That's a perfectly appropriate and proper thing to happen in a democracy. And I was certainly very pleased to accept an invitation from DNPA to come and speak about our own experiences in Australia in developing the News Media Bargaining Code. It will be a matter for the sovereign government of India to determine any steps it chooses to take, and it will no doubt be interested in the views of DNPA, as it will probably be interested in the views of other stakeholders, including the tech companies. So I will leave it to the stakeholders within India and the Indian political process. I'm simply here to say, here's what we did in Australia, and to talk a bit about some of the experiences we had and the outcome we secured.
So, sir, the last question, sir, what final message do you have for the big tech companies? Yes.
I would say that technology is enormously important to economic growth, to prosperity, to inclusiveness. And the position of technology in India is extremely important economically, as it is around the globe, but in many ways India's tech sector is absolutely world leading. And the nature of technology is that it is borderless. The internet is borderless. That presents new challenges for sovereign governments in determining how to respond. So I think certainly in my time as Communications Minister in Australia, the principles I believed were, number one, to welcome, encourage, support the growth of information technology, which is such a generator of prosperity and is making the world a better place. But secondly, recognise that sovereign governments have an important role in making decisions affecting their citizens, and that is true for global tech companies. If they come into a particular country to operate, and of course they operate in countries around the world, they need to comply with the laws of those countries. And so I think those two principles are important and are not in any way contradictory.
Well, thank you, Mr. Paul Fletcher, for sparing time with Amar Ujala, and it was a nice discussion.
Thank you, it's been a pleasure.
डाउनलोड करें अमर उजाला ऐप और पाएं खबरें लगातार।
अगर आप ये वीडियो YouTube पर देख रहे हैं तो हमारे चैनल को सब्सक्राइब करें और बेल आइकन को दबाना ना भूलें। अगर आप Facebook पर ये वीडियो देख रहे हैं तो हमारे पेज को लाइक करें।